listeners and readers of AwardsWatch.com. This is the Awards Watch Podcast, episode 177. And I am your executive editor, Ryan McQuade, joined today by Nicole Ackman.
Hello, hello.
And Dan Bayer.
Hi, everybody.
Just the three of us this week. Eric's gone. Everybody else from last week's just kind of taking their time off, enjoying the Passover, Easter holiday weekend. We're here to take things up a level, sort of lift off, get into the air of it all. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Cue the 80s music.
Oh, God.
Because we're here to talk about Air.
No.
Ben Affleck's film. We're not going to talk about Super Mario Bros.
No.
Though that movie made a ton of money this weekend.
No Chris Pratt here.
But there's not a lot to talk about with Super Mario Bros.
Well, there's a lot
It's Super Mario Brothers as a cartoon.
I am thrilled that the kids finally have a movie in theaters. Genuinely, I am, because there was like nothing since Puss in Boots. So.
Oh yeah, that's true. I mean, 80 for
congrats to the kids.
Was there for them.
Congrats to the kids.
You guys
they can keep it.
You guys are like 80 for Brady wasn't for them?
And I mean, congrats to the kids, especially because this movie was very clearly made for people who are children today, not people who were children when Mario was first released.
You know, the people that fell in love originally with the product.
Yeah.
Dan and I talked about this, texted a little bit about this week of like how this should have been like almost like a Lego Batman sort of situation for Mario, where like they make a lot of jokes that are very specific to like our generation, but then a lot of accessibility also for the new generation, right?
No, they were making a movie for the kids.
Yeah, they were strictly making one for the toddlers of today. And that kind of hurts because I think that there's still like a lot of untapped potential in this Mario world. And,
so much.
I don't know when I'll ever see it because Dan was basically like giving me the rundown of it and it did not sound great. Nicole, did you see it?
I did not. I just got the rundown from one of my best friends who saw it.
Oh, so Dan too.
Yeah. Dan and me's like other best friends.
Yeah, so. No, I get you. Yeah, but it also just didn't like we were originally thinking about talking about it, but like Dan says, that movie just sounds like exactly what it is, and it's you're not getting anything special. And then like the reviews came out, and it was pretty much the same thing. So we decided to just talk about the other film that came out this weekend and sort of tie in the top 5 to it. We've talked about musical biopics before, but we haven't talked about just like biopics are based on a true story films, and that's kind of what we're going to do tonight. We're going to talk about our top 5 movies based on a true story. They kind of have that thing on the poster that or in the trailer of based on a true story. You know what I mean? And we know that they're not real or they're loosely very loose with the facts, I guess. But that's where it leads into Ben Affleck's newest film, which is Air, starring Nicole Ackman's favorite actor, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Chris Messina, Jason Bateman, Viola Davis. Did I miss anybody? Chris Tucker, Marlon Wayans, right? There's a ton of great people in this cast.
Yeah.
It was the closing night film at South by Southwest, festival that Dan and I were at. Dan unfortunately went home before this movie came out. And premiered there.
But I did see it back here at home.
That's true. And but I was able to see it there. Wrote the review up on the website. Really like this movie. And it's been garnering a lot of praise. This movie I think is really interesting behind the scenes as well. Dan and I were talking about this film's budget this week. We found out that it's like anywhere between $70 to $90 million.
What?
Because of the fact that they thought that it was originally just going to be a straight to streaming film, and then they pivoted to putting it in theaters. So this was technically supposed to just be like a streaming release, and then
interesting
and everything. And a lot of it was pushed because of Ben Affleck and Matt Damon's new company, which is putting a lot of the creative artists top salaried in the business or whatever, getting their salaries up front before the cast. So it's a really interesting sort of film. It's also, a movie that is about a company that we all know now, which is Nike. But at the time they were not as successful in the basketball shoe industry. And this is about Sonny Vaccaro, played by Matt Damon, who is putting all their chips in the middle of the table to land the person they think is going to make a deal of a lifetime and change the world, which is a newly rookie sensation out of North Carolina in Michael Jordan. So lots to discuss here. Nicole, I'm going to kick it over to you first.
Yeah.
This was your most anticipated film of the year.
It was. Yeah.
Truly.
Really was. She was like, I cannot wait for this vehicle. No, I know that I know Nicole. She's my friend, and I know that Matt Damon is not particularly in her wheelhouse. I don't know your relationship about Ben Affleck. Mostly just Ben Affleck as a director. And if it's any better than that. Or if you like his other films. I mean, this is his 5th film behind the camera. First since I think 2016 with Live by Night. So return to form, behind the camera, because he's been doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes and fixing his life and stuff. So your thoughts on Ben Affleck's Air?
Yeah. So to start out with, like you said, Matt Damon is my enemy.
This is not a Jimmy Kimmel bit. This is
real. It's not. Like,
no, this is for real. Her sworn enemy.
I genuinely hate the man. For a multitude of reasons. One, like his face just annoys me. But also, there are things like he had to be told in what was it, the year of our Lord 2020, not to say the F slur. But Ben Affleck, I don't like, but partially because of his proximity to Matt Damon, but he's not my enemy. I'm not gonna fight him in the street. Like I might for Matt Damon. And you know what? I don't really care about sports, but I am a North Carolinian, and that means that I do love Michael Jordan.
There you go.
Because it is bred into us to love Michael Jordan. Yeah. Also, I was a Space Jam kid, so Michael Jordan is one person I do know about. And so I was interested going into this. I had sort of low expectations for how I would like it, because I know that this is very much just not my department. I will say I went to see it in a theater in North Carolina, and listen, the people in my theater were having a great time. Yep. They were eating this up. I was like, y'all, this is not Avengers Endgame. Because they were kind of acting like it was. They were living their best lives. I was like, I don't know what in this you think is so funny, but I'm glad you are experiencing joy. Unfortunately, I did not find it very funny. I found it kind of boring, to be honest. It's one of those movies based on a true story that I think chooses the least interesting person as its main character. Watching it, I couldn't help but be like, damn, I just want a movie about Phil. I'm interested in all these allusions to the creation of Nike, because that sounds like a much more interesting story than what I'm getting. Especially there's the whole weird thing about the fact that they're telling a story that heavily involves Michael Jordan without ever really showing him as a character, which is strange. And I obviously I love everything to do with Viola Davis in this and his mom, but I also was like, every time it just came back to Matt Damon, I was like, can we get a move on? I'd like less of this, because I don't even think this is a particularly good Damon performance. I am big enough to admit there are Matt Damon movies that I love. I literally the other day was rewatching Ford versus Ferrari, and I'm going to talk about another Matt Damon movie later. Spoiler alert. Start thinking about what that could be. But yeah, this is one of those movies where I was like, yeah, it's fine. I was in a theater that was genuinely mostly middle-aged and older men, and they seem to love it. And I think they're the target audience, and I think it's working for them. So, it's fine.
Okay. All right. Dan, I don't actually know your relationship with Ben Affleck as a director, if you like his films. Obviously, Ben Affleck is a director of a Best Picture winner. And
yes, he is.
And
one that he was not nominated for Best Director for.
Yep.
And one that, perhaps controversially, I'm not mad about him missing that nomination, frankly.
No, he's not one of the snubs for me personally. I get angry about from that year. Maybe that's an Oscar retrospective we could look at down the road. But yeah, no, but
it's a lot of year.
So a lot of the reasons why I think he was snubbed was, I think, also a lot of the reasons why that movie ended up winning Best Picture, along with the fact that it was a hit and he was riding high from Gone Baby Gone to The Town and then to Argo. He had a stumble both with Lit by Night and then also in his personal life. It seems that he's been kind of riding a roller coaster with stuff in his life and his performances. And there was the Snyder stuff, and then there's his alcoholism, his divorce, and all this other stuff. But now he seems to be like back in the memosphere, right? He's at the Grammys with J-Lo. He's married to J-Lo now. He's back with this movie, and he's super excited about it.
He's got the Flash coming.
He's got
the whole thing.
Whole other controversy,
God.
I guess he's going to have to weed through
Lord.
there. I don't think that he's the problem with all that, but but yeah. So I'm curious what you think about Affleck, as a director, and what you thought about Air.
Ben Affleck reminds me a lot of the directors that used to work a lot in the studio system. He is a very solid director. Like in some ways, like I don't know if this is actually true, but he reminds me of like a Clint Eastwood. Like, we are done on time and under budget every time, and we're gonna have a movie that is gonna be like, it's gonna speed by. You're gonna love it. Mm-hmm. It's just gonna be really solidly populist effective entertainment. Yeah, it's going to be good at what it is, even if it's not a great movie. And except for Live by Night, unfortunately. But
that's a bad movie.
I think Air is sort of like the best, like him as a director in a nutshell, kind of. Mm-hmm. Like it is solid. It is solid, easily digestible Hollywood entertainment that doesn't do anything wrong, but to me, if you sort of don't have a built-in attachment to Michael Jordan or to the Nike as a company or Air Jordan shoes, if you do not have a particular like reverence for this product that this movie is about, for me, it's very hard to get excited about it because it's not like there's a whole lot of, it's like this is some super stylish visionary filmmaking where that will sort of sweep you along into enjoyment if you're not interested in the story. Or, there's not really lots of like strong directorial signatures on the movie. It's just really, really solidly made. And did I enjoy watching it? Yes. I think that the script is really smart, and I think it has some good laugh lines in it. But honestly, throughout most of this movie, in my audience when I saw this in New York, and I know this wasn't the premiere at South by Southwest, but there was a lot of dead air in that screening. And I think it's weird. Like, it feels like a perfect movie for streaming in a way, because like it's not like, it does not scream, see this on a big screen. It's very like sort of like, bland visuals and a really fun 80s soundtrack that I like literally within the first 10 minutes of the movie, I was like, their music budget must have been fucking huge.
Well, Amazon, because to like do whatever they want.
Oh my god! And like A+ soundtrack. You don't even need to buy the soundtrack for this. Just go to like 1984 on Spotify, and you will get all these songs. It's crazy.
I literally described it earlier to someone as like, this is a film that does not pass Harry Styles' "Is it a movie" test.
Yes.
It's not a movie. You don't need to see it in a theater. You can watch it on your iPad, and you won't lose anything.
Yeah. This reminded me, there are a bunch of series actually like this on Netflix called The Toys That Made Us. That is like, it's a series of hour long episodes of the creation stories behind, like teddy bears or board games or Barbie. And this felt like a feature length film, like episode of that, or like they took an episode of that show and adapted it to a movie. The Shoes That Made Us. And it's very weird for me to see like people from Generation X making a movie that is so like, oh my God, corporations and products, aren't they great? Because Gen X was so like, stick it to the man, and we're going to be original, and we're going to, just like fuck everyone, and we're going to do us. And for them to be now in their like, now that they're in their 40s and 50s, being like, oh my God, the man is totally awesome, guys. We didn't need to stick it to him at all. It's just very like, it's a lot of tonal dissonance for me.
I feel like this is the pro-capitalism movie that people thought Tetris was. But like,
yes, very much, Nicole. Yes, very much. And again, like, not that it's a bad movie at all. It's well made. It flies by. All the performances are really good. And there's lots of great dialogue, but like, it's not really something that's going to get me particularly excited.
Okay. All right. Well, I get to be that guy.
You get to be that guy who like, I want to hear. I love to hear your defense of this movie, Ryan, because I love hearing people who are so passionate about a movie like, especially movies like this that, often I think go just completely unremarked upon at the end of the year when people are making their final lists and stuff.
Yeah, so I think that Ben Affleck is a very interesting director in that he's made a lot of movies that are very familiar to him. I mean, you're making essentially Boston crime dramas and heist movies, and then he's kind of doing a lot of what like Clooney was doing, like Eastwood, even Redford, sort of what you would expect from a Hollywood director that is also an actor. You build your resume doing something small, and you build up to a certain point, and either you can land that plane, no pun intended for Argo, or you can't, and you don't, and you crash it, Live by Night. And I think Ben Affleck, to me, has always been somebody that, like, I agree with Nicole. I've never been like the most giant Matt Damon fan in the world. I don't hate the man, but I don't also like, when I think of the greatest actors on the planet, I don't think of Matt Damon. I think of maybe presence. Maybe he's one of the most like recognizable Hollywood faces we have. And their story is very interesting of coming, up and through the 90s and everything with Good Will Hunting and getting to this certain point. But I don't particularly think that, like, if you had a Matt Damon movie on the marquee and you had something from Leo, or if you had something from Denzel, or something from Tom Hanks, or even Tom Cruise, another controversial figure, right? I'm probably most likely going to lean over to those other categories from those other male actors than I am somebody like Matt Damon. That being said, though, I think Matt Damon and Ben Affleck have been making some really interesting choices over the last 3 or 4 years. In particular, I think, Ben Affleck's work in the movie The Way Back recently, where it really had him confront his alcoholism and really finally went into this very dark place. And him and Gavin O'Connor did that movie that I don't think is that great, but I do think Affleck's performance in that film is particularly vulnerable and something that we just don't get to see from him that often. And for another movie that I don't think is particularly that great, in something like Stillwater from Matt Damon that came out just recently, that is the performance for me that I was like, this is kind of unexpected, because he looks kind of unlike Matt Damon in that movie. And he's playing essentially a Republican and a very unlikable guy. And yet he's in this very precarious situation. That movie falls apart because of its script in the third act. But there's a whole second act in that film where I just think that Damon is delivering stuff that I didn't know he was capable of. Then there's The Last Duel, which is a movie that I actually really like. And I think that, Affleck is giving a performance in that is completely wild. And Damon is good. I think he's good. He's not the best thing about that film, but he's good. That script is amazing. I think
we'll talk more about that later.
We'll talk about that movie later. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think so right now them kind of making this movie is very interesting because it is tonally different than a lot of the dark, stripped down, vulnerable genre dramas that they've been making over the last couple of years. And instead they're making something that I think is unabashedly optimistic. has its heart on its sleeve and is essentially a movie that I don't think that we get made a lot because it's trying not to be as cynical about the world. Yes, it knows, just like every one of these damn movies know, in particular when you're dealing with something so prolific as a giant commodity like the Air Jordans, like Michael Jordan. Like when you walked into the social network, you knew Facebook was okay. You knew Mark Zuckerberg was okay. You know what I mean? Not particularly okay people, but you knew that the product launched and it got there. But the movie was about the journey to get there. And this is a movie it's not about Michael Jordan. It's about the effect that Michael Jordan and that player has, or that person can have on an individual to believe. And this shoe is revolutionary. The shoe is something that it not only changed the fashion industry and the film industry and various other things, because you have the Spike Lee commercials and everything.
Arguably for the worse.
Arguably actually for the best, to be fair. Because
arguably for the best in terms of the quality of the footwear, but for the worst in terms of how marketing has completely taken over every aspect of life on Earth.
To be fair, though, this movie shows that this shoe actually revolutionized and gave the modern athlete, and especially the African American athlete, the right to be able to, make a brand for themselves. Because this movie is deliberate. Like I think the shining scenes of this movie are between Viola Davis and Matt Damon, who I think are incredible in this movie. And particularly Viola Davis. I think this is one of her best performances I've ever seen her do. She's so effortless in this movie. It's unlike most of the things that we've seen her do. And it's because you buy into their conversations. And Matt Damon literally lays out about how the machine, the man at the time, is Converse and Adidas, and how they look at even the biggest athletes in the world, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, as collection stones. They look at them as commodities. They don't invest in the individual themselves. And brands and products weren't doing that for the longest of times. And what Jordan what Nike's whole recruitment strategy is we're going to build it around the belief of a person rather than you building it around a brand. And it's the faith that this is all going to work out based off somebody's incredible talent. And yes, in terms of this marketing strategy, this working out for them, because this was all or nothing. Nike was going to lose their entire, department. All those people are going to lose their jobs. I think personally, Bateman does a great job in this movie of establishing the stakes of everybody that's working within that department. I think what's also great too is this movie is really a one location set based film, and it's really stripped back for Affleck, who did get out of control as a director with Live by Night and went too vast and too big. This movie is stripped down, and therefore he's kind of back in a comfort zone and behind a camera where he's not doing anything that's going to wow you. He's just going to specifically let the script and these actors do the heavy lifting. And I don't think that we get a lot of movies like this anymore, where they're just confident. They've got an energy to them, a vibe to them. It is led by this great soundtrack editing that I think is particularly sort of effortless for me, at least. The movie goes by very quickly. It's very digestible for audiences. And yes, for a lot of like Nicole's audience, a lot of dads are really going to love this movie. All right. It calls and harkens back to a lot of that. But for a lot of people, this is a movie about just being able to believe in somebody, even when that person doesn't believe in the company within itself, because Michael did not believe in Nike, didn't want to even have the meeting. And just, I think that this movie, as an optimistic hope, can be about shedding all those doubts and all those feelings of which, you have a preconceived notion about somebody, and having some trust left. And so is it a little maybe optimistic for me to say that this is a movie that I saw and I was in tears by the end, because I was like, wow, it's from Matt Damon and Ben Affleck in this cast. And I didn't think that it was going to be able to, because I've seen all the jokes about this movie. Shout out to our great friend Kinsey Vanunu, who did the we bought a shoe bit. Like, I get that.
It's good. It's good.
I get it, but also too, like this movie isn't trying to be anything more than just a movie about this important event, and then also the end cards suggest that Sonny Vaccaro is somebody that we should know. More like also Billy Beane is somebody that most people don't know who is in something like Moneyball. Most people don't know who the Winklevoss twins were at the time, or other people in most of these films. That's what the film is there to do. They're there to introduce us to somebody that was completely wrong on a lot of things, but was able to finally say that this is my last shot. I don't have a family. I don't have anything. All I have is my belief in the shooting guard out of North Carolina. And it's not like they were investing in the number 1 overall pick. They were investing in somebody that went third. And Michael Jordan, if you know just a little bit about him, I think that he's got the biggest ego in the world. They had the Last Dance documentary that came out a couple of years ago during the pandemic. And that is a documentary about Michael Jordan. You want to know about Michael Jordan? There's that. You want to know about the deal and how Nike, which is now one of the biggest companies in the world, was literally on the verge of collapse and needed this thing to resurrect them, then yeah, I think that it's not a bad study of something like that, because we've had movies that are like, even something like The Founder, which is about like the rise of McDonald's and Roy Conch and stuff like that. And so I think that this is a really interesting film, and it puts its heart on his sleeve. And I don't know, I kind of want more movies like this, weirdly enough. And I did not expect going into this movie. I thought it would be like fun, but then like Dan says, like half of the 80s is played in this movie. Like all the music from the 80s played. I'm like, wow, like they just kind of let him go. And I kind of appreciate that, because it's like, oh, there's the Ben Affleck that we should have seen after Argo. Somebody that should have just been like able to do something a little fun and different and have a different vibe than before, instead of making one of the most depressing theater experiences I've had in the last 20 years and Live by Night, which sucked the soul out of me. Yeah. So it's pretty good. I think it's one of the best films of the year so far. Yeah. Yeah, Dan, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah. It's my number 3 film of the year so far.
I'm very happy for you, Ryan.
Yeah. I'm very happy. Movie made like $20 million this weekend. I was surprised by that. I was like,
it's good, which was slightly above expectations and projections, if I recall. I think
we're living in a good time for the box office right now.
Yeah, box office is back, and I'm glad that it's showing that adults are going back to the movie theaters again to see movies like this, like the mid-budget adult drama. It's maybe back.
Maybe. Which is weird, because like 6 months ago it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But like,
yeah,
now it is. Like it's maybe it's because like it's a familiar product, like Nicole you're mentioning. Like it's Michael Jordan. It's about a shoe that most of the people in the room probably are wearing a Nike shoe in the theater when they're watching the film. You know what I mean? But don't really maybe know the full details of the story. You know what I mean? As opposed to like, you're able to pitch this movie in maybe a sentence or two, unlike something like The Fabelmans. You know what I mean? Which is like a much more like hard film probably to sell to audiences. But then it's also counterbalancing a very terrible Super Mario movie that a lot of people say is out there. You know what I mean? Or people have seen John Wick enough, or Dungeons and Dragons, which is also a fun little film that came out. So yeah, I think it's like a really good time for the box office. Good variety on the marquee right now.
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
I mean, I went to see Dungeons and Dragons this past Friday evening.
Yes.
And there was, I'm not joking, not an empty seat in my theater. So like, shout out.
You love to see it.
I mean, yeah, I do. No, but truly, like, I feel like we're having a really good time at the box office right now between, Super Mario and Dungeons and Dragons and John Wick 4 and then Air and it is unfortunate. Basically, all of those films, even though some of them like do some original things, are based on existing properties. Even Air is about Air Jordans.
I mean, you mentioned it, but Apple TV right now, they just released Tetris.
Yeah, they have Tetris.
It's just like the story of Tetris, which I will say this, seeing both films, and Nicole, you mentioned this kind of too.
Yeah.
I think that one looks more like a TV movie or a streaming film, especially in like the makeup and the aesthetics and sort of things like that. This feels, maybe because it's from a more established director and it's got movie stars attached to it more than just Taron Egerton, that it looks a little bit more polished and mature than that movie. I mean, they are doing some directorial things in that film, but then it's also like, there's that scene where like they go to the rave in the middle of the movie, and I'm like, you just did this in like a warehouse in the middle of Southern California, didn't you?
But
like,
that scene is the greatest scene
God.
in any movie of the year so far. Taron Egerton just like living his goddamn life, singing the final countdown is literally all
it's so good.
Out of life.
We're in an 80s renaissance. Yeah.
And I like that they took chances with that story and like, tried to do something with it. Also, that's just like a crazy wild story. The wild part of this story is that Nike wasn't always the number one shoe seller in the world, and 2, this guy went to visit Michael Jordan's mama.
Right. Like, I think Tetris is inherently more cinematic in the story that it's telling, and the stakes are so much higher. Like, I think that's part of my issue with Air, is that like the whole stakes of the film are just like Matt Damon's character might lose his job because they'll shut down the basketball division of the marketing of Nike,
which we already know doesn't happen.
Right.
But we also know about like Tetris too, that like everything worked out fine. Like,
no, but we don't know if the Russian like guy who invented Tetris is like, I at least was like, is he gonna live through this?
I was like, literally, how are they going to get out of this country?
I was literally
for most of that movie. Like, I know that eventually they do, but how? It's the how of Air that to me is not as interesting in terms of plot.
Well, Dan, I know how they did. They borrowed the ending from Ben Affleck, the director of Air, to get him out of the damn country. They borrowed the Argo ending out of that movie.
I know, but they added fun 8-bit video game graphics to it. So,
it's just like it's like them just tapping their toe into that, not really like going full on with it. It's like it's like they were like given maybe like the choice, do you want to do this or do you want this sliding to look a little better? And then like Apple's like, okay, you can only have one, sweetheart. And they did that for like a couple of cars. It's like that. It's not like they went like full on with it. You know what I mean?
Look, I think that like they could have used those visual effects like much better and more consistently.
I don't know. I was watching the movie thinking like, what could Ben Affleck do with Tetris? That's what I was starting to think about. Like,
sure,
honestly, I
think that makes sense. Especially since like like they invented that race to the airport for Argo, and they invented it for this movie too.
For sure.
It did not happen that way. Like, come on.
And that's the thing is, most of the things in both of these films are not like, they probably didn't happen to the letter of the law. Like that's the thing about, based on the true story.
Yeah.
I mean, like they don't happen all the way like this. It's about, does it work plausibly for the film? And I think for both films' cases, they work pretty well for themselves.
My issue with Air, like I think my biggest issue with it really just is that the story that it's telling to me does not warrant like how long is this movie? Like 2 hours? Like a 2-hour film.
Like an hour 40.
I thought it was shorter than that,
maybe it's an hour 40. I don't know. It doesn't, to me, I'm like, I could have
just felt read long to you.
I could have read like a newspaper article about this and gotten everything that I needed from this story. Whereas like with something like Tetris, I'm like, I'd read a whole book about that because that's bonkers. And there's so much intricacies of it. Whereas this, I was just like, I don't really care because I feel like it's not really that big of a deal. I don't really know what the stakes are here because they feel very low. And I feel like the most interesting character in it is a character that we never hear from. So
bingo.
you know, and I don't know. I'm like, I just don't really care about what's his name, Sonny, at all. Because the film doesn't really give me any reason to care about him.
Well, the whole film isn't really even, I mean, one, the more interesting thing about Sonny Vaccaro is actually in the last card of the film, which is that with a deal like this, he's able to then springboard and open up the sort of NIL. For many people that don't know out there, is the way that a lot of college athletes are now being able to profit off of their name and likeness and brand.
Which I'm like, you can't put the most interesting thing about a person in the last end part of a movie.
It's an interesting thing, but also too, if he doesn't ever get this damn deal done, he doesn't ever get to have the credibility to go and do something like that.
Yeah, but like I think that threading that thing that he did, whether or not it was true, as a theme throughout the movie that like of athletes' rights and how they're treated, I think that would have gone a long way to making me, a non-sports person, more invested in the story, because it's just like, it's Michael Jordan. He's going to be a gazillionaire because he's a genius, legend, once in a generation basketball player. What do I care if that he signed with Nike over Converse or Adidas? Well, and I think that this context that comes in right at the end of the movie, after we've sat through an hour and 50 minutes, would have been more impactful having that actually threaded through, as opposed to and also he did this.
But it is, for me at least, threaded through entirely, because you look at the way in which Vaccaro and, played by Matt Damon, and then of course Bateman, who is his counterpart here in this film, they have a singular budget. This is what every single shoe has done. It's the sort of way in which Adidas and Converse have created the market of putting all their brand and their money behind singular talents and letting the shoe, not even letting the shoe or the person speak for themselves, rather the company speak for themselves. This is the first time where the company invested in the human being rather than in the idea of collecting somebody like a frickin' Infinity Stone and or a trophy and throwing them aside, and not really, because there's that scene where he's talking to Viola Davis and he's saying, this is how they're going to treat you and Michael in these whole entire thing. And then they show it to show that you are not special. You are a commodity that will you are not going to be better than Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, greatest players of all time. And it's like, bullshit, he is. And we know that, but still.
The best scene of the movie, when he tells her, this is what each of those companies is going to do. And then she goes on the trips and she sees them do all the things.
All that.
By far, I think that's my favorite, like, script thing structurally the movie does. And I have no doubt that Sonny actually said that to them in real life, because he's a smart guy and he knows. However, I think that when you're right that they talk about all of that in the movie, but it's, to me, and maybe either you or Nicole felt differently, but to me that always felt like it was about Sonny saying, like, this is the athlete that I want to sign, and
this is the game he's willing to take.
The rest of it was just this is what it will take to get him.
Yeah, that's exactly
right. But it never
is that I never believed in watching the movie that he really cared about, like, specific athletes getting what they deserve, sort of, out of these deals. To me, the way that they played it felt very much just like he was willing to do whatever it took to get Michael Jordan to sign this deal so that he could keep his department, so that Nike wasn't going to give up on being a basketball shoe. Like, and I wish that they'd given us more of a sense of Sonny himself actually caring about this as like a bigger issue and not just like as a way to get the deal signed.
Well, no, he's seeing it as the chance and this is how I felt, at least, because there are those early scenes where he is not a marketer. He is a basketball analyst. That's what he is. Like, the job of a marketing team and to keep the doors open is Bateman and obviously all the way up to Phil Knight, played by Ben Affleck. They're the dollars and cents. They got the board to answer to and everything. He is about providing you with the evaluations of
he's a scout.
This is what I think is going to be transcendent. And if we don't do this, then we are fools to do so. And this is not going to just change our company. This is going to change the world. And he has to get them all to buy into that. And he's looking, I love those scenes early on when they're in the draft room and they're talking about, and if you know these other athletes too, like John Stockton and Charles Barkley and some of these other players that get drafted.
The Charles Barkley was funny.
And you're kind of sitting there and you're going like, well, these are first round Hall of Famers. And they want to give like percentage of their budget to them, right? Because that's what they are able to do.
Yeah.
Get a bunch of C and B players that, you know, can help their brand continue to be exactly what it is, and not really help those players at all, even because their talent doesn't think that they care about them, because that goes back to sort of Chris Tucker's like stance of like, what's the vibe on the street for Nike? It's like, this place sucks. Like nobody cares. Nobody thinks you care about them. And so you have to think of it in a different way, which is like Sonny's like, we have to build the shoe around the person. We cannot build it around just the same idea that has been done. We can't continue to be the competition. We have to break the competition in doing a way that feels more individualized. And that's what breaks down to the film, where he's like breaking down that great shot from North Carolina in the national championship game, where he's sitting there and he goes, he's not a decoy. He's the play. He is exactly what Dean Smith calls. Like he's, and I love scenes like that in movies, just where like someone's like, I don't see what that is. You know what I mean? It happens in all of like based on true story movies. Like, I don't know what he's seeing, but show me and tell me more. You know, it's the very Aaron Sorkin-esque sort of thing. And I think that Sonny does have the passion for it, because he's doing irrational things that you just don't do. Going over somebody like the agent and going to speak to the parent is even still nowadays a giant no-no.
And also, God bless Chris Messina for his performance as the agent.
God,
beautiful,
so and his
performance,
like sort of tennis match of dialogue with Dan.
Oh, it's great,
it's fantastic. Like and then I think what I love too is like there's the humor of this movie between Ben Affleck and his sort of erraticness as Phil Knight. The sort of the cafeteria scenes where they're taking the food even though they shouldn't, or how like to pay for it. Ben Affleck coming in late for the final meeting, which is absolutely hilarious, because he says he's going to like confidently come into this room and show up late, and he fumbles the whole thing. The pitch is terrible. And then I think ultimately this movie comes down to, if you buy into Matt Damon's dialogue at the end of that film. And if you don't,
but here's the thing.
If you don't buy into that speech, then it's probably not going to work for you. And I understand that.
Okay, here's the thing. I totally bought into that speech. I thought it was really well written. I thought Matt Damon performed it exquisitely. I just maybe this is a problem with like, I don't know if this is a problem with how the film chose to tell the story or not, because I don't know much about the real story other than what this movie has told me. But they kept talking a lot about, and you just did too, about how like it's about the person in the shoe, and we have to make him feel like we really want him and we support him. But they designed this shoe for him without any input from him. And in fact, the character Michael Jordan has almost 0 lines of dialogue in this movie. And that felt weird for a movie that is supposedly pro-athlete. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad choice, because clearly, like, I do think you're like, yes, you could play it from Michael's perspective, and he has all these competing offers, and that could be really exciting. But obviously, you know, you want to tell the story of the one that rose to the top. But for me, it's just like I didn't I didn't get that feeling that they really were about the athlete. I mean, even at the beginning of the movie when we see Matt Damon's character like at watching all the high school basketball games, and he gives him his card and says, "Remember Nike," not "Remember me," or like, we're gonna make sure you have, like giving them any advice on career or how to, once you become a professional or anything. It's like, remember Nike, remember our business because we need you.
It's almost got like a car salesman feel to it, like in that scene, like
and
the way he snaps that card out.
And again, like it would have been like to just like tie in that final detail about him about where this led to. I think, and again, like maybe it's just that I'm not a sports ball guy. Like I know nothing, I have no connection, but like for me, the non-sports person, that would have been something that would have made me more invested and made me thinking that this is about more than just Nike making a shoe for Michael Jordan.
I will say the colors and design of the shoe were intentionally made for Michael because he was being
for the Bulls. Being
drafted by the Chicago Bulls. So there is intent on why it looks and feels
and they did say that in the movie, but it's like, what would he have wanted this shoe to look like? What sort of details, like what are important to him? Like for them to be so athlete focused and to not have them the shoemaker sit down with him and be like, what are the problems with your shoes? Or how can we make them better?
Fair, he doesn't want to go to this meeting. He doesn't want to.
Yeah, I know.
So but like in order to then have that all comes sadly after the fact, which
sure.
My thing though is like we know that he's really picky about his shoes because they keep talking about how like he wants to wear the Adidas even when he's supposed to be wearing the Converse, like whatever.
Yeah.
So I want at least for them to be more thinking about like, okay, well, like what do we think he prizes in a shoe? Okay,
right?
He wants like cushion, like he, But I think for me too, like the part of the story I'm most interested in maybe is the idea that Michael Jordan goes from this sort of cocky young athlete who's thinking about this purely in terms of which shoes do I like best
and which one will give me a car.
Right, and who's going to give me a car, to through his mother's guidance realizing that like there's something more on the table here. And there's an opportunity in, this is the deal that sort of makes him into not just an athlete but a businessman too, in a way, in terms of like him realizing that there's more to this than just playing ball and getting paid for it. And I wanted some of that. Like I wanted Michael Jordan to at least be a supporting character in this movie, and he's not.
I can understand that. I mean, Affleck has gone on to kind of explain that.
Yeah.
If I cast somebody as Michael Jordan, you won't believe them, but you don't know who these people are, so I can cast whoever I want in there.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a cop out, but he also I
think it's a major cop out.
But he did also.
He didn't write the movie, so I want to hear what the writer has to say about it.
But he also did consult Jordan a lot on this film, particularly. Also, that's why Viola Davis is playing his mom. So Jordan did have at least opinions and thoughts that were expressed, and it didn't have at least his thoughts. So he gave his blessing on the film, which I think is,
of course, which is great.
Is, I mean, like, I think that these are in way two different things. Like we can make a Michael Jordan movie down the road. I already think we made a complete Michael Jordan movie. It's called Space Jam. But and we can then have this film. But I agree.
Let's not go there, shall we?
Space Jam masterpiece. Thank you very much. It's
Space Jam ruled in 1996. Watching it as an adult is painful.
It's painfully hilarious because that movie still rules. But no, I agree. Those are legitimate concerns you have. But there also were things that I kind of just was like, you know what? Like Affleck has made a good enough movie here for me to not pull this apart and pick it apart. I think that this is honestly a very sincere way of doing this. He also has the consent of the person behind this is mainly about, which is both Sonny Vaccaro, Phil Knight, Nike, and Michael Jordan. And I think that when you have all those, then you're able to tell the story that I know is not 100% true. Um, but and that's okay. And it's not going to fit everything in there, because I think if it does fit everything like that in there, then this movie starts turning into 2.5 hours long. And then also gets a little bit, confused from what it all is to about, which is just supposed to be a fun, easy sort of movie. Like I like, by the like, sure, the comparisons to Tetris, you can make those comparisons. I think that there's a lot of films out there that you can make these comparisons to. For me though, it just felt like there was just a little bit more of an elevation in terms of the technical craft, as well as the overall ensemble, which I think is absolutely incredible here. Particularly like we mentioned, Davis and I think Affleck again continue to play those kooky kind of performances, which I think is kind of great for his wheelhouse. But Messina and Bateman too are really great, and Chris Tucker is really nice to see in this film. And
Tucker's energy is so his own, and it's so nice to have him back on screen. I also loved the casting of Matthew Marr as Peter Moore, the shoe designer. Love him as an actor, and that was a perfect use of him and his energy.
And I love Julius Tenham playing Michael Jordan's father, and
he's good.
Who is married to Viola Davis in real life, and they bring a real sense of because as a married couple, there's this effortlessness to their performances and their bond as parents for Michael too. And I truly did really appreciate just their, even though it's not like they are supporting characters in this film, their time together on screen was really great. And and like Marlon Wayans is like comes in one scene in a bar, and
he's great,
hilarious in this movie. So and
give me more Marlon Wayans in this movie.
Give me more. Like that scene was great, and then like coming back on like for him at the end was a great capper off.
That was good.
Ultimately,
basically, give us more characters that can give Matt Damon a talking to.
Yeah, I feel like I think Damon's performance is really good, but I also think too these actors around him are doing a great job, and really kind of he just has to be a kind of a great point guard here. And just kind of facilitate dialogue for them to go and hit jumpers all around the court. You know what I'm saying? He's really
right.
good.
Stop
it.
I don't Stop it. No, we don't know what
you know what I'm talking about.
Stop it.
Airs in theaters. Airs in theaters right now. You can go see it. And then I think it's in like 45 days or something like that. You can see it on Amazon Prime. Okay. So inspired by Air, we are going to do our top 5 movies that are based on a true story. I think this is a category that all 3 of us really love, but particularly I think Nicole Ackman, this is like right up her wheelhouse. So that's why she's here tonight. Nicole, did you have any criteria going into this list before we begin? Did you have like anything you wanted to omit, or anything you were just like, I'm going to put this in a penalty box, or did you were just like full game, going to go all the way with this list?
Okay. Like you said, this is my favorite genre. I am, as a historian, like it's not that surprising that I'm really interested in films like this. I really enjoy, even though like it's also a genre that sometimes I really hate. Like I think that they really can go to either extreme.
It really can be just the worst if it's not done properly.
Yeah. My thing was trying to make sure that I was letting myself include things that were both like biopics, but also things that were more just sort of films based on a true story that aren't like a specific biopic of one person. And I purposely shied away from anything that was sort of like an autobiographical type film of a director, your sort of Fabelmans, your Belfast. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna set those to a side.
Those almost feel like a different category within themselves.
Exactly, because I feel like those are something quite different. But I was also trying to make sure that the ones I was showing would be sort of a not all the same type of film exactly. But yeah, I love talking about these types of films with people, and I'm so excited to see what y'all have on your list.
Dan, any criteria you had?
So I decided to take out movies that were full biopics in that like cradle to grave sort of storylines, but ones that were focused specifically focused on one event in someone's life, we're okay. I took the inspired by a true story thing very literally. It's one story that we're telling.
All right. Okay.
And I also didn't want to do movies that were like that in terms of my personal like thing would fall more under inspired by a true story that like based on true events but like so fictionalized, or like something that was quote unquote based on a true story but that story was like not really true. Like I fucking love Bloodsport, but that's not a true story. Like it's
also
not.
Okay. So another thing for me is I was like, it has to be based on an actual true story. It can't just have like a real setting, which rules out something like a 1917 or a Titanic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, there was a real Jack and Rose.
Just not.
I mean,
that
but this is not
Jack
a
and Rose.
I'm
story.
kidding.
Yeah.
Big Jim did do the thing though. My only criteria is that I excluded any Best Picture winners. I did not want to include any Best Picture winners in this list.
Mine already doesn't have any.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think I have any, but that wasn't like.
I don't think I have any Best Picture nominees.
Like
I do have nominees.
I do have nominees. But I wanted to get rid of things like Lawrence of Arabia and Amadeus. And movies that I absolutely love. Don't get me wrong. But I just thought that, like we're going to spoil it. We're going to probably be talking about Best Picture winners here in the next couple of weeks. So I just thought, save that for a different conversation at a different time. So, and I just wanted to highlight some movies that in particular, they're sort of a mix between what Dan was mentioning, like some Cradle of the Graves, but also most of these are particular instances that happen in these films that I think are pretty spectacular. And so with that, Nicole, what's your number 5?
Okay. And I will say, like, this list stressed me out so much because this is one of my favorite genres, but there were several things that I ruled out sort of because they're too similar to other things I'm including. But my number 5 is actually sort of a off the wall pick. And it's The Death of Stalin, which I think is a really interesting film, in that it takes a real circumstance and like a real thing that happened, and like very clearly they did quite a bit of research into the actual events that happened following Stalin's death, and make a hilariously funny like satire of it, that also does make a lot of really interesting points about like the actual historical significance of what was happening in terms of like the power vacuum that was created when Stalin died. It's a film that I love. Jason Isaacs in it is so important to me. And it's a really surprising film because I feel like it's a film based on a true story that nobody saw coming. And it's one of my faves.
No,
I'm so glad you love this movie, Nicole.
I love this movie so much that like I literally, the year that it came out, bought the Blu-ray of it and sent it to like, one of my best friends from college because I was like, you have to watch this. And I like, we don't live in the same city anymore. And I was like, Andrew, you must watch this. I am sending this to you so that like you can't get out of watching it.
That whole cast. Tambor is hilarious. Andrea Riseborough is hilarious. Everybody, and like you said, Jason Isaacs, like what the hell?
I just
literally just talking about it. I'm like, damn, I need to go rewatch it.
It's so good. Iannucci is our foremost satirist, political satirist. In the Loop is perfect. I don't think that Death of Stalin is as good as In the Loop, but it's still so good.
Yeah,
like there are films that are based on true stories that I think are like better than this one that I like, but I do feel like it's such a cool example of what you can do with something like this that I think not enough people sort of take this creative of an approach to this genre.
No, I love this movie too. I just remember the was it like the record recording at the beginning of the like for the orchestra, and they like screw it up at the beginning of this film. Like, it's one of the great openings of the last decade. Like I just remember like dying laughing in the theater.
So good.
It's I agree with Dan. Like between In the Loop and this, in obviously his work on television with Veep, Iannucci is an incredible satirist. I will say also, just for our listeners out there, for you guys as well, if we do have a similar pick, we will talk about that pick all together within that time when it is brought up. And even if sadly that is your number one pick, you will get plenty of time to talk about it. Don't worry. But just for time's sake, so we're not talking about a movie 900 times. But Dan, your number 5 pick.
So like I'm just gonna put this right out there at the top. Like, these are very loosely ranked. My number 1 is my number 1. The rest could be any number, mishmash, whatever.
But this is your number 5 today.
For today, this is my number 5, and maybe I'm being a bit inspired by the time of year.
Okay.
By the religiosity of this weekend. My number 5 is The Passion of Joan of Arc.
Oh.
Nice.
Which
I really wondered where that was going for a hot second.
Yeah, he said passion, and I went, "Oh shit!" Yeah.
You saved it though. We're all good now.
Look,
I was like, you know what?
It's not Falconetti's fault that within like the first couple years of the cinematic medium, she gave the best performance that anyone has ever given on screen. But she did.
That
And
movie turns 95 this month, right?
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
It is. I love
Eric was there
everything
in the theater
about
to see it.
He was there when Joan of Arc was burned at the stake, if you can believe it.
Yeah.
And
he was like throwing
he can confirm the historical relevance
accuracy.
and accuracy of the entire thing. Yes.
I love this movie. This is the first, I feel like this is the first example of like the director fuck you movie to the studio, because they spent so much money building these like lavish sets for this movie, and it's almost all shot in close up. The faces of the priests that are interrogating Joan are genuinely terrifying. I don't think that there have been many faces on screen captured that make me feel as genuinely afraid as these do. And it is just like, it's so early in cinematic history, someone really understood the full power of the moving image to contain emotions and make the audience feel something. And this is just like, it's exemplary. It does that better than maybe any other movie I think I've ever seen. Maybe. I'm like, I'm trying to think of one, but no, I think this is maybe the purest transfer of emotion from performer to audience through film that has ever been managed in cinema. And it's just a stunning film from the first frame to the last.
And for our listeners, it is available on HBO Max, I believe.
Yeah, and I believe you can buy it via the Criterion Collection.
Yep, you can.
As well. It's a great pick, Dan. It's a great pick. My number 5, I know that maybe you guys might have it. It's very easy to go with something probably written by Aaron Sorkin on this, because he's like the king of this genre, it feels like, over the last like 20 years. And it would be very easy to think, oh, Ryan's going to go with The Social Network. It's just kind of hanging free right there. Wrong. I am going to bypass The Social Network. Actually going to take the film that I think is much more emotional and kind of another reason why I love movies like Air and others. And I'm going to take Bennett Miller's Moneyball at my number 5.
I was hoping, yes.
A movie that I think that what I love about The Social Network and what I love about Moneyball are sort of the same things. These are two movies that premiered about 10 years ago, and they predicted everything that has absolutely happened about these two entities that they are trying to portray. One is the despicableness of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, and how that is built upon an absolute asshole leading that company. And the other is with Moneyball, it is about the love and yet dangers that analytics can have with the game of baseball, and particularly all sports, and how numbers aren't as as they means of anything in terms of just how these small organizations with not a lot of materials behind them can create a championship like dynasty. And what I think is really the tragedy of Moneyball, besides Brad Pitt's heartbreaking performance and in this movie's really just journey through Billy Bean's entire sort of hero that is like on these peaks and valleys at the highest moments of his team's career, time in the playoffs or whatnot. He can't watch the game because he feels this pressure that he is the reason why they're going to lose, and it's because he is a loser. This is a guy that was a top pick and he didn't work out. He's part of an organization that will not spend any money to retain the athletes they need to continue to go after titles and have the lowest payroll. There's us, other baseball organizations. They're 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. And that sort of line in that movie is exactly what the Oakland A's are, and they have to use analytics to get there. But the scene that breaks my heart is the fact that Billy Bean has at the end of the season this meeting with the Boston Red Sox, which, if you know anything about the history of baseball, you know that the Boston Red Sox at that time were in this enormous curse, the curse of the Bambino, which was, because they traded Babe Ruth, and they needed to do something different in order to change that. And they thought that Billy Bean and analytics were the way to go. And the tragedy of it is that Billy Bean's, because of his hardened commitment to the Oakland A's and this dream that he's chasing, decides to say, and 2 years later, using the same model and a little bit more money, the curse of the Bambino was broken, and Boston's gone on to win 4 championships in that timeline. And
the ultimate tragedy of Billy Bean's life.
And then Billy Bean has gone on to essentially stay in the same role for the rest of his life.
And never win a World Series.
And yet his impact on the game is much more than winning championships. And he talks about that with Jonah Hill, is that if we get this right, we changed the game of baseball. And it did. And now basketball and football and everybody use this. And it's dangerous, I think, because of the fact that you're essentially using numbers to determine human beings' lives. And yet it's also very profitable, because if you got a lot of money and you're smart about it, you can create a dynasty. So I think that this wonderful script by Steven Zaillian and mostly Aaron Sorkin coming on and doing the rewrite, mixed with Bennett Miller, please make a movie soon, and his direction, it's really good. And so Moneyball, I know you guys don't probably have it, but it's a really good movie. It's also I think maybe my favorite Brad Pitt performance, because it's not just him being a movie star. He's actually complex, and the scenes with his daughter are very emotional, and yeah, and Jonah Hill's really great. Philip Seymour Hoffman in it a couple of times. This is Chris Pratt before he became an asshole. A bunch of stuff like that. You know what I mean? So, yeah, pretty good stuff.
Good fucking movie.
Yeah,
Nicole,
good pick.
You seen it? Okay, I was just making sure I didn't pick something that no one's seen. Years ago.
I love Moneyball, and yeah, it's. I don't know if I'd say it's Pitt's best performance, but it's definitely one of them.
It's right up there.
He's giving a real performance, so that's something.
I would have given him the Oscar that year.
He was a very close runner-up for me.
Yeah. Would you still
Jean?
Oh, okay. You would give it to Dujardin.
Yep.
Okay. Nicole? No. Pitt, Clooney, Oldman, Bashir, Dujardin.
I don't know.
It's okay.
I truly don't know. I would need to think about that.
Yeah,
longer.
you don't have to rewatch. Just give us your number 4 pick. How about
that? My number 4 pick is a film that I really love. It is a really interesting film in that it depicts something that's fairly recent and was highly sort of reported on by the media whenever it happened, which I think makes the film even more interesting. And I think what's greatest about it is how the director uses the events to make this commentary on sort of our culture of consumerism and celebrity worship and a lot of things like that. And of course, I am talking about Sofia Coppola's The Bling Ring, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. I think that it is so fascinating, sort of how she uses the story to make bigger statements about particularly the culture of LA, but the culture of the United States during this time, which of course, like, is interesting because she's making it not that long after it all happened. And I know, you know, a lot of us sort of saw, oh my God, what is her name? The character that Emma Watson plays had her like reality TV show. And so I think that this, you know, the source material of it all is really interesting in the way that she brings it to life, which is, you know, well, obviously dramatized, like not super sensationalized. Like it's actually fairly close to the real events. I think it's just super interesting. And also this film gave us Emma Watson saying, "I want to rob," which is the best line history in the history of cinema, or the best line reading in the history of cinema, if you ask me. But yeah, it's also just like the way that the film has so much fun with like the costumes and the settings, the excess. And then it makes these points that like almost as a viewer, then you feel a little bad for how much you've been reveling in this, you know, blatant consumerism, and sort of this fast fashion, high fashion lifestyle and all of that. I don't know. I just think The Bling Ring is one of the smartest movies made in the last like 30 years. And a really, really good example of how you can bring something to life without sort of, it never feels exploitative of these kids, because really they were kids that it's about, but it also doesn't sort of shy away from what it's portraying.
Yeah, no, I love that movie. It's one of my favorite Coppola's. It's really fun, but also but also has like a message by the end of it too. Just like, you know, it's very cautionary too.
Yes.
I think that's kind of also the great thing about movies that are based on a true story, is when they have a sort of a cautionary sort of message behind it in the end, or it's not so cleaned up as you would think maybe it should be for life. I don't know. That's what I love. I can't wait for Priscilla later this year. Same.
Yes.
I like that, you know, she clearly shows she's not trying to like act like these kids weren't doing something that was wrong, but she also doesn't demonize them for it. She sort of shows how they got there because of the culture in which they're living.
Yeah, they're products of their
environment.
Exactly. And I think that she, you know, does a really good job of sort of walking that line of not excusing like their actions, but also not reducing them to, you know, the bad thing that they've done.
It's a good balance between that. Yeah, for sure.
The Bling Ring is a fantastic example of sociological study as cinema. It really goes into every aspect of the culture that they were raised in and what they wanted and what they saw as their right to do things.
Yeah.
And like every single one of those performances is iconic.
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 I think about Emma Watson in that like sweatsuit a lot.
I could be president one day for all I know. I could run my own country one day for all I know. She's freaking brilliant. And Leslie Mann is also brilliant as the mom. And she gets too few shout outs.
Yes.
How good she is. And like Israel Broussard, great.
Yeah.
Dan, you're number 4.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna say it. I like classic Hollywood movies.
Okay.
I like their clean storytelling. I like their not quite formula because it hadn't quite gotten to that point yet, but still feels very familiar. And I mostly love the quality that those actors had. I don't know what it is about the acting from that time period. There's something about it that I'm just drawn to. And The Diary of Anne Frank is classic Hollywood filmmaking at like super high level.
What a pick.
It is a classic for a reason. And, based on one of the most heartbreaking true stories that has ever been written, from this actual teenage girl just writing about her life and writing so eloquently about it. And it is one of those films where, like, with an ensemble, that there is not a single false note among the whole cast. The direction is it is clearly a prestige picture, but it's not too heavy. You're always invested in the drama, but it really hypes up the entertainment aspects of that. You have the romance between Anne and Peter, the suspense of if they're going to be found out. It's not played as heavy and portentous. It's played for going to a film. We want to be entertained, as well as, not educated, but we want to be entertained, as well as, getting food for our souls. This movie doesn't talk down to the audience, and that's something that I think is really it can be difficult for movies about the Holocaust to do, because it is speaking from such a position of like, my God, Holocaust was terrible, right? Like it was pretty bad, right? Like, that's maybe we shouldn't do that again. Like, it can be hard for movies about the Holocaust to like avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie, because of its focus on these characters and their dynamics and what it would be like to live in this close, confined space with them under these political conditions for as long as they did. I love this movie. It's something that I was first shown at a very young age, and no matter how many times I see it in the years since, it still affects me the same way. It's still heartbreaking, and especially the final sequence when he returns to the house is just, it's gutting. It's gutting every time, but it's gutting and it's weird to say this, but it's a gutting in a way that still manages to make you feel good. And I think that was something that like classic Hollywood did better than any other movie making system in history.
Okay, thank you for reminding me about the existence of this film. Because I will be gone from the AwardsWatch podcast for most of May, because I will be in Europe, and I'm actually going to Amsterdam, and I'm going to go to the Anne Frank house. So thank you. I need to rewatch this before I leave, and before I go there. So yeah, God, like, also one of those things where you're working with incredibly beautiful but also sensitive source material, and the way that they handle it is so thoughtful and respectful, while also still like really getting into the emotionality of it. Just beautiful.
It really does feel like you're watching the scenes from Anne's diary play out. It doesn't feel like it was written by someone who was 30, 40, 50 years old.
Well, it is a beautiful film, and great pick, Dan. Great pick. My number 4 is movie from 1975. It is Dog Day Afternoon from Sidney Lumet. Dan, is that a face of that? It's on your list too?
Yes.
Where's it at, Dan?
Do I have to say?
Yeah.
It's my number one.
Is it your number one? All right.
Yeah.
We're talking about it now.
The best movies ever made.
Yeah, it is truly one of the best movies ever made. I will let Dan speak more about it than myself, other than I will say that when I first saw this movie, I was just gobsmacked by these two performances from John Cazale and Al Pacino. It's my favorite Al Pacino performance by miles.
Good, yeah.
It is. I mean, it's weirdly both also regressive and very, also very much ahead of its time too, and what it's trying to depict here of this relationship between this queer man and his trans lover. And then you also have the complexities of Inside the Bank and the way the Met is able to just bring it all in this very claustrophobic setting, and yet it broadens out with so much tension to these just this wild edge of your seat bank heist film. And it's all about the fact that every single person, every hostage, everybody in that bank is given such great creative agency to themselves that you feel invested in every character, and even the officers and everybody outside too. This is a delicate tightrope tension thriller that I just they don't make. When they say they don't make movies like this anymore, they're talking about Dog Day Afternoons. I believe it wasn't it like rumored that they were going to try to remake this or something like that, or I don't, maybe I was just wrong about that, but it's a one of a kind.
I sure hope that wasn't
I thought maybe it's like out of my head, but it's one of those films that just it is a landmark of also 1970s cinema as well. But yeah, it's not my number one, it's Dan's. It's my number 4. So I'm Dan, why do you love Dog Day Afternoon?
When I saw this for the first time in a cinema, I was sweating.
Yeah.
The characters are sweating, and the theater was very well air conditioned. There was no need for me to be sweating.
AC was not broken.
AC was not broken, unlike that time when I saw, because we just talked about Sofia Coppola, when I saw Fart.
The Beguiled?
Yes, The Beguiled.
Okay, I kind of figured
AC was down.
Oh,
it was the perfect atmosphere in which to see that movie.
That's literally perfect.
That movie is hot.
It was like I was in the South, in that swamp.
Very
I was
swampy.
there with them. Yes,
you were in a soup.
Perfect.
Yeah,
perfect. Yeah, but Dog Day Afternoon, man, this movie just starts at a 10 and does not let up. It, from the word go, it's you are in it with these guys, and Cazale, and I mean Cazale is so good, and Pacino.
I think about Cazale way too much because of just the fact that we lost him at such a young age.
So early.
The fact that what performances could we have gotten out of this man?
I mean, this is already just one of the best performances. Two of them is two of the best performances, and I also think Chris Sarandon is really good. Yeah. I think that for this being one of the first films to really feature a trans character like that, I think it actually does a really good job of treating this character like a human.
Yeah.
And, not a thing.
Yeah.
Like it would have been so easy to do at the time.
There's empathy.
Yeah, there's empathy, and this when he calls to, when he's on the bullhorn, like trying to get Al Pacino to come out. It's God. The direction in this is just some of the best I've ever seen of a thriller suspense film. I love the entire ensemble, all the bank workers that are in there, and like it's so well written. It's hilariously funny in moments, and I love that it really takes the time to situate these characters and even this specific building in New York at that time. It gives you a lot of context for what was happening around and where these people in this place fit in, and once you're there, like, buckle up because this is going. And it's one of my favorite films, one of the best films ever made. I can't say enough good things about it. It is one of those films that, like, whenever someone mentions it, I'm like, you know what? I should watch that again.
Yeah.
Which is maybe the
also,
best compliment you can give to a movie.
It's also like a deeply tragic film. But yet you keep going back to the well because it's just so beautiful. Too. And it's a movie just about somebody at their absolute most desperate. We've seen so many bank robbery heist films since, but none of them, I think, ever really get to the emotional core of their characters quite like this one does. It's one of those where you get to throw out the word masterpiece and it actually means it. You know what I mean? Because it is. So, yeah. Nicole, have you seen it? Have you seen Dark Day Afternoon?
I haven't actually.
Oh, okay. That's
so
okay.
Good.
It's good. That's another one you can watch on the month you're not here. That's add it to the list. As Steve Rogers would say, I'll put it on my list. You know what I mean? So.
It's one of the best almost single location thrillers that has ever been made.
I'm very intrigued.
And also too, goes real quick for 2 hours.
Really quick.
Yeah.
Really quick.
And really, like, there is nothing like watching Al Pacino work up that crowd outside. Attica! Oh my God.
But yeah, I mean, as much as I love Pacino in that movie, so great. It's his over the topness mixed with the low key of Cazale in there too, and just they both have this great connection as scene partners. So I think you really love it, Nicole. I think
yeah.
But Nicole, it's time for your number 3. What's your number?
All right. I promised we were going to talk more about this movie. Listen, no one is more surprised than I am that I have a Matt Damon film on my list, but The Last Duel is, I think, one of the most interesting movies based on a true story ever made, in that it really plays with the idea of interpretation and perspective, and the idea that, you know, whenever we talk about historical accuracy in films that are based on history, there's often this idea of, oh, well, something's accurate or it's not. And as a historian, that's not how things work. Obviously, on a certain level, there are things of it's accurate or it's not, in terms of, you know, they weren't wearing that in that time period, or, you know, they're using an invention that didn't exist. But whenever you get to the heart of things, you know, historians don't agree on everything. There's a lot of things in history that are still open to interpretation. There's a lot of things that we don't know, which is why, you know, this is a film that I think really plays with that. And then my number 1 film also talk about this a little bit, with this idea that, like, you know, with a lot of especially earlier history, whenever someone goes to make a film about it, they have to choose like which interpretation are they going with, because different scholars believe different things about what actually happened. So there's no like right or wrong answer for a filmmaker. But I think, you know, whenever they first announced that they were doing The Last Duel, I was a bit worried because I read the book, and, you know, it is the sort of thing where there are multiple perspectives going into it because of the sources that we have about this story, because of the patriarchy as it has existed since the medieval era. And I think that it could, you know, have been a very sort of dangerous thing with the world that we're living in, with the Me Too era and all of that, if this film sort of tried to suggest that maybe there's a version of this story where the sexual assault didn't occur. But I think that the film handles it really well in, you know, sort of privileging the woman's perspective in this, and not putting into doubt that this actually happened to her, but sort of making us look at the fact that every one of these main characters has a different perspective on how all the events of it passed. And you would think that a movie that essentially takes you through the same story 3 times would get boring. But partially because of the fact that Adam Driver and Jodie Comer are doing incredible acting work, there's so much nuance in what we're seeing differently each time in terms of the events that are happening and the relationships between the characters, that it is incredibly riveting. I saw this in theaters like multiple times, because I think also like it's an incredibly well made film in terms of costumes and production design and location and cinematography and all of that. I think it's really, really well put together, and it's also really well written, but also like this is my favorite Ben Affleck performance of all time because he is just going like balls to the wall in it.
Movie. Yeah.
In a way that feels right for the film and in a way that provides some levity in a section where you kind of need it. But like also him being so insane next to Adam Driver being so somber is hilarious and so fun to watch. I also love Matt Damon in this movie because I do love Matt Damon in any film where his character is just asshole. Because then I'm like, cool, great. I love a bit of typecasting. But no, truly, I think that there is also something very admirable in the fact that they brought in Adam Driver to play the character that he does, that they didn't stick one of themselves into this sort of role. I think it shows like a self-awareness that I would not normally expect of these two men. The fact that they brought on a female writer to work on the like sort of female perspective in this film shows a self-awareness that I would not normally expect from these two men. And again, like I said, Jodie Comer is absolutely phenomenal in this role, but
robbed by all awards bodies.
Truly, robbed. Genuinely, if I got to control awards, both Jodie and Adam Driver would be nominated for their performances in this because and
honestly, why not Ben Affleck too?
I mean, honestly, Ben
Affleck too. Like, well, let's throw him in. But especially
we don't need J.K. Simmons nominated for being.
No, we really don't.
Listen, we really didn't.
We really don't need any of those nominations. So let's just replace.
Truly replace him with Ben Affleck.
That's fine.
This.
Like, movie's great. Yeah. Not being Ricardo's the Last Duel. So.
Oh God.
Yeah.
if any of you try to put that movie on
we're not putting I'm
this
I'm
list. I will
done with
fight
Sorkin
you
tonight. Thank you.
Okay, good. But yeah, I think especially the way that this film sort of shows that there's different sides to every story, and also sort of though shows us like why, like it's very clear that like what Matt Damon's character is telling us is not the full truth. And I love that it plays, I love that it plays with that though. And I think it's a really interesting way to portray something like this, and I think that it works so much better than if they'd done sort of just a straight telling of this story without the like 3-tiered perspective on it. So I love this movie. I understand it's not for everyone, like it's not necessarily an easy movie to watch, and I totally get why there are people who don't want to sit through it because it does feature a fairly graphic sexual assault scene, but I also do think it is one of the rare times where like a film needs that scene, because it is very important that even in the perspective that we see of Adam Driver's character, it is not clear to him what is occurring, but it is clear to us as the audience what is occurring. And I think that's really important in sort of telling this story and asserting on every level that this truly happened. And also it's one of those that I'm not gonna lie, like it gets me a little bit emotional as a historian watching it, because it is that thing of like, this is a woman who went to trial for this, and even though obviously in the duel like they won, from the time it happened, her story was discredited, to the point that like his like descendants today like still say that he was innocent, and to have it put out there firmly that she was telling the truth feels like really meaningful to me. And I love this movie. I wish it had gotten its due when it came out. I think it is something that will actually age really well. And also, if it's good enough that it can get me to put a Matt Damon and Ben Affleck movie on my list, then it's
truly. Truly. And seriously, that Last Duel goes
my God.
hard.
Hard.
That was one of the best action sequences that year. It absolutely spectacular.
I love this film. It shows that Ridley Scott can still make great movies when he has a good script. I think that this script is already one of the best of the decade so far. It is that Rashomon style of the way that they put this together, the fact that these three writers wrote separately, came together and made this all work. The editing in this movie is absolutely fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Cinematography, production design, all across the board. Yes, you know, all those performances are that you mentioned, Nicole, are great. But it really is a testament to the page, and it is a testament to, you know, Damon's section. I know a lot of people give a lot of, you know, shit over that section, but you need that section to get to the emotional core of the other two sections. The middle section being the driver section being written by Ben Affleck, which is astonishing. But then obviously that third act in its entirety being written by Nicole Hall Center, who is an extraordinary writer, and having all three of those writers coming together, like, it makes it you kind of forget, as good of movie stars Ben Affleck and Matt Damon are, you forget how good of writers they are too.
Yeah.
And when storytellers.
Yeah.
And and visually speaking, it's a dark movie, and it's very long, but it's purposeful in almost everything that it uses. And it's not one, like you mentioned, that I want to revisit a lot, but it's one I think about a lot.
Yeah.
Because of the
I
fact
really think
it's
Ben
a historian's.
Affleck.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's Ben Affleck at his best, I think, both as a writer and an actor.
Yeah.
Which is really fun to see, because I feel like oftentimes, you know, whenever we see Ben Affleck doing this sort of, you know, not always, but sometimes when he's sitting both in the sort of creative chair and the actor's chair, he's doing a much more low-key performance, like Air, you know, where like he's fine, but it's nothing special per se that he's really doing, other than showing his feet for free. But, you know, this is him really going for it as an actor after writing, I think, what I would venture to say is the most impressive thing he's ever written.
Yeah. It's definitely like, this is the first time that they've collaborated since Good Will Hunting, and I wouldn't say
like, oh, you guys should have been doing this all along.
They should be doing it more often, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's inspired. Like, and then instead of casting Damon Affleck as the lead, they hand this off to Adam Driver, and it's the best actor working today, period. And he just once again nails it. And then Comer, her performance, I mean,
my God,
just a wonderful performance. Yeah, Last Duel, great movie,
incredible,
Dan,
fantastic.
You're number 3.
My number 3. I cheated a little.
Here you go.
Because
I love a cheat.
Because these movies are intertwined. Okay. They are paired. You cannot separate them. And technically, one is a documentary. We have Werner Herzog's Fitzcarraldo and the documentary about it, Burden of Dreams.
I think that's totally fair cheating.
Yeah. I love a good South American Amazon adventure. I considered Werner Herzog and actor Klaus Kinski's other collaboration, Aguirre, The Wrath of God, for this list because I like it better, but that is too imaginary. It's like based on real people, but not exactly real events. So I just take that off. But Fitzcarraldo is one of those movies. The story, it's a true story that is completely insane about this would-be robber baron, Brian Sweeney Fitzgerald, an Irishman who in Peru became known as Fitzcarraldo because he wanted to transport a whole steamer ship up this fucking mountain to a rubber territory in the Amazon basin. And I think he was also going to be like, he wanted to build an opera house there. And it's this journey of him and his crew lugging the fucking Titanic up a mountain. Okay. It's insane. The production of this movie was completely crazy, which is why Burden of Dreams is such a great documentary about filmmaking. 320-ton steamship, and they actually did it. He wanted the crew on the film to actually bring this up this mountain. Werner Herzog is insane. Klaus Kinski, the lead actor, is also insane. And this movie is insane. It is not a great movie, and it probably doesn't deserve to be so high on this list, if I'm being purely honest. But it's one of those movies that, like, its imperfections make me hold it dearer because they make it more like, oh my God, like someone actually did this. Like someone actually tried to film this story in the most realistic way possible. And it's just nuts. My absolute favorite thing about it, my favorite thing, in not about the movie, but about the story of the movie, is that after when they finished shooting, one of the native chiefs who were assisting Herzog in the making of this movie, they offered to kill Klaus Kinski for him because he was such a terror on set. He said no. But
he wanted to.
He wanted to.
He was like, maybe.
He thought about it.
He thought it was a long, hard thought about it, like at least a 15-second pause.
Yeah. So anyway, let's say it. Fitzcarraldo, one of Werner Herzog's, maybe not one of his best movies, but definitely one of his most memorable movies, and Les Blank's documentary, Burden of Dreams, which is one of the best documentaries about filmmaking ever made.
I really need to see it. It is a blank.
You haven't seen it?
Nope.
I need to watch
Ryan.
I know. I'm terrible. Yeah, I got to catch up with it. But now that it's on your list, and now that you mentioned it, Dan, I will catch up with it very, very soon. My number 3. It was kind of undercut a couple weeks ago by like some news that you may or may not want to believe or not, but it's fine, whatever. I still think that the movie really works, and whether it's 100% true or been disproven, it's still based on a person. And that's Steven Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can, which is a movie that I'm a kid of divorce, and when I saw this movie when it released, it broke my heart because it's like essentially about someone hanging on the idea that their parents are going to get back together for such a long time, and then to see it kind of crumble right in front of their eyes to the point in which they're at their breaking point and they lose themselves, and that the surrogate parent in the whole thing for Leonardo DiCaprio is actually the FBI agent played by Tom Hanks the entire time. I think that it's a truly wild and fascinating story. If 100% true, if not 100% true, it's still based off of this insane thing that I do believe did, for the most part, happen, which is somebody stealing a lot of money. Frank Abagnale Jr. stealing a lot of money through checks from the United States, and Tom Hanks having to catch him. And I think this is one of Spielberg's best films. It's top 3 Spielberg for me. Mm-hmm. It's one that is a film that I think does deeply connect, even with his movie last year, The Fabelmans, a lot too. But more importantly, was one of those just like wink, wink clues as well to what we were going to get. I think Christopher Walken's performance in this is absolutely heartbreaking. You get, these kind of small performances from like Jennifer Garner and
love Jennifer Garner and Amy Adams too.
And
God,
Martin
so good.
Sheen, who's absolutely incredible in this as well. But it really is like the essence of Leonardo DiCaprio becoming a movie star. One of those baton movies that I absolutely love, when a great actor like Tom Hanks, who's the biggest movie star on the planet, hands off essentially the baton to the next big movie star of all time in Leonardo DiCaprio. But really is about just this sort of wild and true story. And what's great about a movie like Catch Me If You Can is what happens to a lot of films that are based off a true story too. Is the story goes back and forth within our, through historians or the people that actually are accountable, or portrayed in the film. And this is true. That's not true. This is true. That is not true. And you never know what is true. So you really have this movie, this artifact, to sort of allow the audience to say, like, okay, how much do you believe of this is fiction? How much do you think that you can still connect with it, even if it all kind of crumbles apart? So it's a great movie too. It's like another one of those where it's like I think it's like 2.5 hours, but it like whizzes by. Super rewatchable. I was gonna watch
great score,
great John Williams score. The costume design in the film too, absolutely incredible.
Oh, gorgeous.
That
is one of Spielberg's most fun movies. I think.
Yeah, it's really fun,
like
too.
Pure entertainment, which he does better than just about anybody.
Yeah, and also it's coming right off of AI too, so it's like, hey, Dad,
part two of his 1-2 punch.
Yeah, it's like, Dad, could you probably be a little bit more fun? That last movie you did really sad. And yet even through all this fun, there's still a lot of like emotional catharsis and
yeah. And I love that he did this and Minority Report in the same year.
Yeah, freaking wild.
Your fave could never.
No,
unless your fave is 1993 Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, but we don't talk about 2011. But anyway, Nicole, we're at number 2s.
Okay, number 2. This is the one that I do feel like is the loosest as a film based on a true story in some ways, but also not. And this is my very beloved Tick Tick Boom. Yeah, Tick Tick Boom is also very interesting in that it is sort of a autobiographical piece as its source material, but then with a lot of context sort of added to it by the director and the writer of the movie. I think that, obviously, like, as a theater kid, Jonathan Larson is someone whose life I've always been fascinated by. I'm not even like a big Rent head or anything. Like, Rent is not my show. But I think, obviously Jonathan Larson's life being cut so tragically short because of AIDS and the way that this piece sort of shows so much about what it means to be a person living in New York trying to be a creative in this time period is so fascinating. The way that this movie really is a love letter to the theater community, both then and now, is really beautiful. And I do think it's also one of those things where, like, I genuinely believe that from any director other than Lin-Manuel Miranda, this movie would not have been as good. And I think that that's because Lin owes so much of his own work to Jonathan Larson, in the way that Jonathan Larson owes so much of his work to Stephen Sondheim. And the fact that you have the three of them represented in this film and sort of that path of genius leading through it is so fascinating. I mean, that voicemail from Sondheim in this will always, like, it made me cry when Sondheim was alive. So now when I hear it, I just sob. But this cast is incredible. Like, Andrew Garfield gives truly one of the most, like, transcendent performances I've ever seen. The way that he really does slide into the role of Jonathan Larson is astonishing. And I mean, obviously also just on the level of, like, we didn't know he could sing. He didn't know he could sing.
That was one of the most nervous parts about watching the film.
Yeah.
Going into it for me was like, this is a musical. I don't know if Andrew Garfield can sing. And then I was like, wow, can he be in more musicals, please? Because he's kind of great. Yeah. And
it sounds like it really was a special experience for him making the film. And, also
his mom and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that he really, you can tell how much he loves and respects Jonathan Larson throughout every frame of this movie. But also, Alexandra Shipp is amazing in this. Robin DeJesus is incredible in this.
Vanessa Hudgens,
Joshua Henry, like, everyone in this is bringing their A game. There's also, like, every theater person making a cameo in it, which is so beautiful. But also just, I think that, it not only is a beautiful snapshot sort of this time period and the way that they recreate the costumes and the sets and everything of this time. And, if you've watched any of the behind the scenes stuff, the way that, like, they took these photos of Jonathan Larson's apartment and recreated it and worked with his parents and stuff to get, you know, things. There's like things that were on set that actually were like direct replicas of like artwork that he owned and stuff. And the way that they added in all these little nods to things in Jonathan Larson's actual life while still using this material that he himself created, I think is so special. And it's the kind of thing that like you won't have the opportunity to tell a story in that way using someone's own words 90% of the time. 99% of the time you're trying to make a movie about a real person. And to be able to do that, I think is so special. And yeah, like besides that, it's a kick-ass film that like is inspiring, it's touching, it's fun, and it knows when to lean into its emotionality and when to let it be playful. And it's, you know, also like for a directorial debut, I think it's a really visually interesting movie, and there's a lot of risks, and I know that for some people they don't all pay off, but I think that I always like to see, especially a new director, being willing to take those sort of creative risks to try to make something that's not your average, you know, workman film.
This Lin-Manuel Miranda guy is pretty
something.
talented. Pretty talented.
Oh no, Dan. I think I think you're overstating it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, he's pretty good at everything he does. And I can't wait to see what he does next.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's my favorite Garfield performance. I always go back and forth between him and Cumberbatch of who I would give the Oscar to, because both are such fantastic performances that you never really get to see from the both of them. And then Denzel's fantastic in Tragedy of Macbeth. And then Javier Bardem was lucky to be there. And then there's William Smith. So like, you know, I always think back to that piano scene in the park, and he's talking
so good
about Michael, and the vulnerability that Garfield gives in that performance. It's that doesn't feel like it's just about the characters. That feels there that it's personal, and
I feel like
beautiful.
Andrew Garfield bared his soul in this performance in a way that none of the other nominated actors that year did. Like I think Denzel does great work. I think Benedict Cumberbatch does good work, but I do think it's a much more one-note character than what like what Andrew Garfield is doing here.
Yeah, I mean there is an added element to Garfield's for sure. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think
it's pretty
also
great. It's pretty great performance. But
the discovery of him being able to sing is something beautiful. And being
when he starts that what is it? What's the opening number? 3090?
3090. Yeah,
I love that song so much.
Okay, here we go.
And not only can he sing, but he can sing and act at the same time. And it sounds funny to say that, but there are very talented singers who can't do that. And there are people who can sing and can act and cannot do them both at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that he does like a really great job of that, and yeah, I think it's such a moving performance and such a beautiful tribute to Larson. Without again sort of overly playing into the tragedy of how short his life was cut.
Yeah, no, for sure. Dan, you're number 2. This is your last pick. Your number 2 film.
Yeah, my number 2 is I didn't realize when I made this how 70s centric this list was, but what can you do? There's something about the grit of filmmaking from that era that I think really adds something to the based on the true story stuff. And look, The French Connection is a fucking masterpiece. One of the greatest thrillers ever made. I saw this for the first time a few years back at Film Forum and in the city on the big screen, and was shocked by how modern it felt, how modern it still feels 40, 50 some odd years later. This is based on a true story of the busting of a cocaine ring or heroin ring or something in the 70s. And I mean, you get all the dirty, ugly, grimiest parts of New York City in its worst era, and you get Gene Hackman in his racist cop era, and
I'm sorry, I just wasn't ready for.
I wasn't ready for you to drop that needle. You know,
like, and you have Roy Scheider doing Roy Scheider. And of course, my favorite, Fernando Rey, as the leader of this ring, or not necessarily the leader, but like the big bad that they're after. He is just, that is one suave, slick motherfucker. Just that shot of him as Hackman like just misses the subway, and that subway of him like waving at him as he goes by is just so delicious. And my God, I like, you hear a lot about the car chase in The French Connection and how amazing it is. That absolutely cannot prepare you for actually sitting there and watching it. It's like, I mean, that camera is on the dashboard and you are going. If this was in one of those like 4D movie theaters, like the theme park rides where they like the motion simulators, like it would be amazing. It's so cool. Literally a car chasing after an elevated train on the streets of New York. I don't know. I don't want to know how they planned this, how they blocked it. It is the magic of the movies, and it's freaking great, and it's dirty and gritty and raw, and it's freaking entertaining as all get out.
Yeah, freaking just a genius with the camera. Just an absolute,
really,
just an absolute genius. Yeah, I agree. Dan, that's a great pick. I love The French Connection. But I excluded it because I did not want to include any Best Picture.
Well, I mean, then you're losing some of the best based on a true story movies. I mean, you are,
that's true.
You did that to yourself.
True, I did, but I think I've got a pretty good one at my number two, which is my favorite Spike Lee film, which is Malcolm X.
Very nice pick.
Okay.
I think that Malcolm X is, when everybody talks about these directors nowadays getting a blank check to create a passion project that they were born to make, they need to look at this movie, and also they'll realize that this was not a blank check. This was a check he had to fight to get. And because this is coming right off the heels of Do the Right Thing, which was extremely controversial, even though it should not have been, which just tells you a lot about studio makers, particularly white studio makers at the time, and audiences. And he wanted to make this movie about one of the most influential, controversial, misunderstood, I would say, American, history figures that we have in Malcolm X. And the story about how they wanted, they didn't even want Spike to direct this film. They wanted Norman Jewison to direct this film.
Yeah, which fuck
first of all, fuck right off for that. But then the idea of that the studio wouldn't give him money to finish the film. So he had to go to Michael Jordan and Oprah Winfrey and other predominant Black entertainers and say, this is not a loan. This is an investment into making sure that this man's full story is told. And what he makes is a 3-hour plus epic that I don't think has really been touched this great ever since. Like, the biopic epic for me has never got this detailed since then. And Spike has never had $100 million film, but this is the damn closest we ever got. And he created a perfect masterpiece. Denzel Washington's performance in this is
staggering.
One of the greatest performances I've ever seen in my life. You have Delroy Lindo and Spike, who's actually really good in his role in the film, and obviously Angela Bassett. But it's Denzel Washington through and through. I'm sorry to Al Pacino for Scent of a Woman and his career achievement Oscar. It is bullshit that this performance lost, because there is so much nuance, and the cradle to grave biopic is so boring, and yet aesthetically and knowledge wise it's so rich. And Spike is doing it. This is like this is, yes, a gangster movie at times. This is a meditation movie at times about religion. This is a paranoid thriller. This is about a man falling in love. This is about him trying to protect his family. This is about a nation as well as his own people turning against him. This is a tragedy. This is Shakespearean, and we don't get this. And I think that a lot of people think that Spike overindulges, I think, with his films. And I don't think that that's the case. I think that it's not overindulgence. He has a heavy heart. And the end of this movie with Nelson Mandela and that footage at the end and the impact of Malcolm X.
Incredible.
It's absolutely breathtaking. This, I know everyone, Do the Right Thing is a masterpiece too. But for me, this is like when you see a director go to the next level and he's fighting the entire time. This is, to me, Spike Lee's legacy. And
I think if you asked him, he would probably say that this is his magnum opus.
Yeah, this is him. When everyone said like Damien Chazelle's might never make another movie again for Babylon, like I would CC you on an email about that with this movie saying he didn't think he was making another movie. And this is the kind of energy someone confident and desperate needed it in order to make it. I think that it's a crowning achievement. And I'm like that double dolly shot of Denzel with Sam Cooke playing it's just perfect. It's just perfect. I own this. I have 2 copies of this on the Criterion 4K. I watch this movie at least once a year to be reminded of its greatness. And I can, and it also, it goes by real quickly too. It's it's a little bit of an angry film too, but it has to be angry. But empathy is the key word when you watch this movie. So Malcolm X, my number 2 pick. It was like not even like off. Like I had to pick this movie. There was not a way I was not going to pick it.
I'm genuinely so curious now what you're gonna like top that with.
Well, yeah, that's a like capital M masterpiece.
It is.
Yeah.
And I have
your number 2.
I have one more masterpiece. But before we get to mine, we have to get to Nicole's number 1 pick. Nicole, what's your number 1 pick?
Oh my God. Following that up feels like damn,
sorry, the history major in me is getting out as well of the cage.
Yeah,
apparently. Towards the end.
Well, my last one will come as literally no surprise to Dan, who was friends with me in 2018 when this film came out, and I made it my entire personality for about 18 months.
Well, I know it too. I guess I'm not friends.
Yeah. No, but Dan lived through it.
That's true.
I was literally there. Yeah. I was there.
Yeah. Because it was in my New York City era.
Was in your New York City post London era.
Yeah.
London boy era.
So I will literally the London boy is in the movie.
Literally.
But yeah, and I will listen before I even get into this. I will readily admit that I am biased when it comes to this movie. First of all, it is about my favorite historical figure who I've been obsessed with since I was like 10 years old. And second of all, it is directed by a woman who was like my boss's boss at the time that she was making the film. because I was interning at the theater where she was the artistic director. And it is my beloved Mary Queen of Scots, starring Saoirse Ronan and Margot Robbie in what I consider to still be Margot Robbie's best role. It is the definition of going for an interpretation. It takes liberties with history, but also not as many as you would think it's taking. It is beautifully designed on every level. The cast is immaculate. Saoirse is incredible in this film. But also, like I said, it's my favorite Margot Robbie performance. It's a side of Margot as an actress that we don't often get to see, that I wish we got to see a lot more. I love when she's not doing her like weird New Jersey accent. I was
gonna say, not doing that accent.
Yeah, especially because she does this English accent flawlessly.
Yeah.
And I also think it's a like beautifully, in many ways, non-glamorous role for Margot Robbie. My favorite thing about the film is the makeup work on her and how they show the progression of the smallpox into the scarring and everything, and how it very much, you know, it's about Mary Stuart, but on the side it is telling the story of Elizabeth Tudor and how she becomes Elizabeth I, and how she sort of is driven one way as Mary is driven another. I think that historians have always been fascinated by these two women and the fact that they were contemporaries and the fact that they were, cousins, essentially distant cousins. And the way that it uses, the same themes to show how these two women live their lives in very different manners is so fascinating to me. I love the way that the costuming was done. It's not entirely historically accurate, but it is very character driven while playing with the silhouettes of the era, which I really admire. Like the use of denim in this as a fabric is so fascinating because they're trying to create this contrast between Elizabeth and Mary. I love the amount of shooting on location that they did in this. I think that it's like a really visually stunning film. I think that it is an insane film, again, to have come from a first-time director. I think that, there's so much in it that feels theatrical because Josie Rourke is a very accomplished theater director. And I think that a lot of that really works well for it. I love the way that it was cast. I love that Gemma Chan is in this movie. I think she's amazing in this movie in a very small role, but it's great to see her there. I think this is one of the most interesting roles David Tennant has ever played. And, I mean, God, John Knox, what a role to take on, and he's phenomenal in it. It's really like, it's a who's who of who's working in British cinema, truly. Jack Lowden is great in this movie. I really like what he's doing, and as I've watched it more and more, I've probably seen this film more than anyone has. I realize more and more how layered the work he's doing in it. It also is the film that Jack and Saoirse met on, which is very cute. I really like what Joe Alwyn does in this film. I would love to see Joe Alwyn work with Margot Robbie again because I think they have great chemistry. Like, someone get me the Joe Alwyn Margot Robbie rom-com that I need to survive. Also because Joe Alwyn probably needs a paycheck sometime soon. Because he might be looking for new housing.
I think he's doing fine.
He's got those songwriting residuals coming in. He's good.
He's good.
Yeah.
He's also working with he's continually shown to work with interesting filmmakers and female filmmakers.
Joe Alwyn has worked with more female directors than most men who've been in Hollywood for like 4 decades.
Looking at you, Leonardo DiCaprio.
And honestly, Tom Cruise.
Also, I will call out my faves. Looking at you, Adam Driver. Please.
Yeah. Honestly, like Adam Driver and
he got his start with Lena Dunham.
Yeah.
And he almost none since.
Yep. Yeah.
But honestly, Adam Driver in a Chloe Zhao movie wouldn't be the worst.
Listen, all I want is Adam Driver in a Greta Gerwig movie. That's and then Saoirse Ronan in a Noah Baumbach movie. I need to see them use each other's muses.
That's actually, that makes the most sense.
Right?
I like that. Yeah.
There's a lot of female directors that I think would use Adam Driver really well. Like
Nicole Holub Center.
For the love of God, Sofia Coppola.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, good Lord.
Yeah.
Like, make him a
Oh,
period
really
film.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love this movie. I love everything that it, is saying. I love particularly the way that you can feel that it was directed by a woman, the way that it plays around with ideas around fertility and motherhood, the way that it acknowledges that women throughout history have had their periods. A thing that I realized I had never seen in a period film before this one.
Sorry, that you saying that was very funny, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it's ever something I've ever heard acknowledged in any period film.
Yep. And the fact that this actually acknowledges it is incredible.
Also, Nicole, let's put Joe Alwyn and Margot Robbie in Nancy Meyers' 100 plus million rom-com.
Holy shit.
Please.
Actually,
and over at it, put Adam Driver in a supporting
I was
role.
literally about to be like,
remake It's Complicated with those three.
Like, literally, I was just thinking, like, the way that Nancy Meyers utilized Keanu Reeves give that to Adam Driver, please.
Honestly,
God.
I never thought about Margot because I've always wanted Jennifer Lawrence to be in a Nancy Meyers movie because I think that she would freaking kill that.
Yes.
But yeah. No.
Yeah.
Just get Nancy to make like 10 movies, please. Over the
Truly.
She knows what she's doing.
She has a surprisingly low number of movies for someone as
she's got a bunch of
successful as
she's thinking of.
Yeah. Also, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, though, like, who directed Set It Up? Because maybe that's who I want on my Margot Joe Alwyn piece.
No.
Like,
anyway, yeah. No,
I need someone who knows how to use a hot man. And I know that Claire Scanlon. There we go. I was like, it's right there in my brain. So Claire Scanlon, this is my pitch. But yeah, no, this movie, Mary Queen of Scots, means a lot to me. I know it was not a film that everyone liked. Everybody that year was very caught up in The Favorite, a film that I hate. And I really love the way that Mary Queen of Scots, is able to utilize Mary Stuart and Elizabeth Tudor as foils without using it to demonize one or the other, because too often that's how it's been used.
I think, honestly, one of my favorite things about the film is that it shows how these women were used as objects by men to gain and wield their own power.
Yeah. The fact that even the most powerful women in their countries are subject to the whims of these men, and the way that they respond to it so differently, that like all this pressure on them to bear the heir and everything. Elizabeth responds by saying she'll never marry. And Mary responds by going through a series of like increasingly bad marriages. And I think that, it from the fact that it definitely, you can feel that it comes from the mind and heart of a woman, because of these little touches that it includes. There's shots in this that I think about genuinely at least once a week, like the shot of Elizabeth when she's in the stable and she like has found out that Mary's pregnant with an heir to the Scottish throne, and she like moves her dress and looks at the shadow and sees what it would look like if she was pregnant. It's the imagery in this movie is so gorgeous. Yeah,
and I want more theater directors to direct films, because just the blocking in this movie is so much better than in so many other movies. Like, you can tell, if you knew nothing about British history, you could tell the relationship of nearly everyone to everyone in this movie just by looking at where they stand and how they stand next to each other in scenes. And for some reason, most film directors don't seem to care about this as much as theater directors.
I mean, I think it's no surprise that like Josie Rook was also very early in her career at the Donmar when Sam Mendes was the artistic director. Like, there are certain film directors who come from a theater background who really know how to utilize blocking, and how to utilize, positionality and things. Like, I mean, I'm so sorry to listeners who can't hear, but like the photo I have as my background on Zoom,
it is
where like it's showing the way that these men defer, but there's this sense that, it's a put on deference to Elizabeth. God, I love this movie so much. It's in my top 5 movies of all time.
All right. I need to revisit it because when I saw it at the time, I did not like it. And sorry, Nicole. I just want to be honest with you. Okay. And it was generally one of the more disappointing films of 2018. But I haven't seen it in 5 years. And
I really do think it's worth a revisit.
I need to, because I know that a lot of people are very passionate about it, and I know this is one of your favorites, and I love you, Nicole, so I'm going to give it another show. And if you're gonna watch like Dog Day Afternoon and some other films, then I can at least do the rewatch. That's for one of your favorite films of all time. I think I can do that. So I'm putting it on the list. So last pick, well, that goes to me. And so Nicole and Dan,
since as a reminder,
just
my number one is Dog Day Afternoon.
Exactly.
Yep.
A couple minutes ago, they were just like, well, how's Ryan going to follow up talking about Malcolm X as number 2 with whatever you're picking at number 1? Guys, I love movies about a lot of things that are based on a true story. I love things about process. I love movies about particularly our profession, journalism. And I've loved films like Zodiac. I love movies like Michael Mann's The Insider. None of those movies for me would exist if when I was 8 years old, I did not see Alan Pakula's All the President's Men. Which is, to me,
almost made my list.
The quintessential film about journalism. And every time I watch this movie, I just think, holy shit. We know everything about Nixon at this point. This movie is literally released a couple of months after the Nixon's out of the office. You know what I mean? So it's not, or a couple of years after he's out of the office. So it's not really like the world has not yet digested. And yet Pakula turns this into that paranoid thriller that he's so good at with like Parallax View and Clute, and really closes out like a trilogy here with this movie, which is about like, what if 2 journalists who have literally nothing in common except desk space decide to write about the biggest scandal in American political history. And Dustin Hoffman's great in this film. He really is. Questionable human being, really great in this movie. But Robert Redford, my God, is absolutely incredible in this movie. I think that this is my favorite Robert Redford performance, because these aren't the typical kind of movie star performances that you would think that these two are going to give. These literally feel like they're just the best looking journalists you've ever seen. And I was on Twitter the other night, and they just showed the scene of the re-elections going on, or the celebrations or the conventions going on in the background, and everyone in the office is around the television drinking and having cups of coffee and all this stuff. And Redford's just on the phone, and the back and forth between Redford having this call and a secondary call and all this stuff going back and forth, and getting to the point where he gets the people on the phone mixed up, because he's
so good,
and it's so effortless. It's just effortless in the performance, but it's also like, yes, of course, like he's writing on notepads and he's showing up to the courtroom and everything, but it's all done at such a meticulous pace. And then of course there's Hal Holbrook's wonderful performance as Deep Throat in this movie.
Brilliant.
And the setup and style in which Pakula uses the camera to fade away to see that pot, and then the use of sound with the footsteps from the 1970s in here, as well as the darkness and shadows and the cinematography. It is an absolutely perfect film. And then there is the shot in the library, and when they are in the, I guess I think it's the Library of Congress, and they're that crane shot where he's pulling away, and Hoffman and Redford are, and it's the aerial shot of them just pulling away and seeing the vastness of the Library of Congress, but these two men sitting around this desk together, united by trying to figure out another small piece. And then there is the conversations, the connective tissue that to try to get these witnesses on the record. Robarts' performance as Bradley too is absolutely fantastic. And it's to me also, they don't get the full story all the way. This is just part of this is like the first this is like the first go round of the story. The movie ends with this ticker tape of how news would come in the newsroom of all the other stories that they write and all the other things that happen, and it ends with Nixon's resignation, and it all starts between these two dedicated people. But then also too, the use of typewriters in this movie is absolutely fantastic, because then there's that scene where they think they're being bugged, and the way that they could communicate with Hoffman at the desk and Redford and him sort of exchanging back and forth, the only way that they communicate is through the typewriter, through the written word. And it calls back to the trust that they have between the beginning of the film, where Hoffman is taking the finished pages of Redford and he's trying to like style him up and pizzazz him, and Redford just hands him everything, and he says, if you're going to do it right. Don't half-ass it. And then their editor comes, both of you, you're on the whole thing. And they kind of just look at each other. But then by the end of this film, it is about these two people that really are essentially against the world trying to uncover this. And they're not the most likable people. A movie like Spotlight doesn't exist also without this. She Said, that came out recently, just as last year too. This is a monumental achievement in kind of creating its own sort of genre. And yes, I love all those films, but this one was where I sort of became really obsessed with the idea of somebody really good at their job and the process of what the written word could do. And yeah, I saw this at 8, and I continue to see it for the next 25 years all the time. And it's one of those movies I put on and I'm like, oh my God, like I forget how great a movie like this is. It's lightning in a bottle.
It is an almost perfect movie. I have literally just one problem with it.
What is it?
Is that it's too short.
It is too short. It could go longer. Like it
is too good of a movie to compress all of that story into just like title cards at the end.
Yeah.
Like it's so fucking good, and then it just like ends. I'm like, you're just gonna tell us what happened as opposed to like giving us more. I want more of it, and it's like the movie's problem. It's too good for its own good,
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that if it kept going, it probably, he would have probably lost a little bit of its luster. But
give me the 4-hour cut, okay?
Dan coming out here with
I want it.
Yeah,
this
no
movie
edits.
should be as long as the 10 Commandments. It should be as long as Lawrence of Arabia,
and we should watch it every Easter.
We should watch it every July 4th.
Yes, but no, just a perfect film, and one of my top 10 films of all time.
No, it's great.
So. Nicole, have you seen All the President's Men?
I have, but I will admit I've not seen it since I was like in high school.
Okay, that's
yeah.
It is one of those high school.
Yep,
sort of like
it is.
Your English teacher puts it on in the afternoon or whatever sort of thing too.
I was very lucky in high school. I had a history teacher who was very like passionate about film, and who really was the person who like got me started being interested in movies, and like he is who showed me The Godfather and Lawrence of Arabia and everything that I know. But yeah, I've not watched it since then, so I definitely need to like rewatch it at some point.
Yeah, Bakula's you talk about blocking in Mary Queen of Scots, just the camera placement, the blocking, the production design, it is just like a perfect achievement. And what's so crazy about it, it's like probably like the third film that's going to win like in that lineup because there's Network and Rocky that year and everything. But people kind of just like, for me, that's the best film of that year. I would award this Best Picture because its legacy also has lived, I think, even longer than those two have, for me. And I mean, it creates a subgenre too that, like, you know, Zodiac's a movie that's built off the back of this, or The Insider, you know, Michael Mann talked about this movie particular a lot, because of the fact that, like, that movie is a paranoid thriller, you know what I mean? Like, and that's exactly what this thing is. So yeah, it's, you know, Malcolm X and All the President's Men, put those movies on, kids. Those are pretty good movies, I would say. We run long, but that's what happens when we're really passionate about movies. So you can just kind of like tweet at us or tell us some of the movies that we didn't mention, honorable mentions or whatever. But we're gonna wrap the show up. So Nicole Ackman, can you tell everybody where they can find you and your work on the internet?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Nicole Ackman 16.
All right, and Dan Bayer. Dan's muted. So for all of our listeners out there,
I'm here.
Dan muted himself.
I'm too tired.
We're keeping it in, baby.
Okay. You can yell at me about how I included no films made after the 1970s on my list on Twitter at Dance and Dan on Film, at Letterboxd at Dance and Dan.
Honestly, good for you, Dan. Because, like,
can I tell you, really, I had Erin Brockovich, Queen Margot, and Goodfellas on my list, and then decided to take them off because they were, like, you know, more biopicky.
Yeah.
And Queen Margot, there's a little too much that they had to invent, but I love all those movies. And also my six, if there was a sixth place, it was Heavenly Creatures.
Oh, okay. Ooh, okay.
So
yeah, I would have. Yeah, even though Goodfellas didn't win Best Picture, even though it should have over Dan.
Yes,
like, I've talked a lot about how much I love that movie, and I kind of I didn't get to mention that, but that one was penalty box for me for sure. So
yeah,
I get it. But
my sixth is Emily, which comes out on VOD later this month, and this everyone
fantastic.
Another great directorial debut.
And they had such great taste in their choice of poster quotes.
There you go.
And trailer quotes.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
I probably put like Zodiac as my number 6. Like,
Zodiac is good.
I love that movie because it ends and it's just like, and when that movie ends, you're like, oh,
well, fuck.
Well, yeah, exactly. You're like, fuck. I guess we're never gonna solve this. And that's the great thing about it is, like, every time you rewatch it, they aren't solving this case, and yet it doesn't mean that it's any less thrilling or suspenseful. Plus, Jake in that basement, my God, Eric would be swooning. So you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Ryan McQuade 77. You can find my work here at AwardsWatch. You can find all of our work here at AwardsWatch. And you can find my work also at the playlist, In Session Film, a bunch of other places. Next week, what are we doing next week? It's the 2003 Oscar retrospective. That's right.
Get excited.
Hobbits and sea biscuits and masters and commanders alike will be on that show. So, and maybe we'll get a little lost in translation while we're talking about everything over down at the Mystic River. So there you go.
Ryan,
just totally.
Billy Crystal is very proud of you right now.
You're welcome. Yeah. No, I'm not going to do it. Because even that song, if you've seen it, prepare yourself. We'll talk about it. It's not aged well. So there you go. We're going to talk about that. We're going to have a big panel. We're going to have a bunch of stuff. Maybe there'll be some trivia. There'll definitely be some shoulda, coulda, wouldas. There'll be a bunch of things. We're going to talk all about the 20th anniversary of that Oscar ceremony. A big sweeper. Just like the last one we talked about, a big sweeper, kind of off the heels of having another big sweeper. So thank you. Until then, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you all next time.